They called her just a housewife. At lavish dinner parties, her husband Richard would pat her hand and smile condescendingly, telling his friends she managed the important things like floral arrangements and charity auctions. He painted her as a delicate accessory to his brilliant financial career. But while he saw a decorative object, he was blind to the razor-sharp mind, watching his every move, a mind that meticulously balanced household ledgers with the same precision he claimed to apply to the stock market. He never imagined that the woman he dismissed would one day hold his entire empire in the palm of her hand, ready to close her fist. This is the story of how Evelyn Reed, the forgotten woman in a gilded cage, orchestrated one of the most shocking financial takeovers in history, proving that the most dangerous opponent is the one you never see coming. The clinking of crystal glasses and the low hum of self-important conversation were the soundtracks to Evelyn Reed's life. Tonight was no different. Their sprawling penthouse with its panoramic views of the city skyline was filled with Richard's colleagues, men with expensive suits and predatory smiles, and their wives, women with equally expensive dresses and expressions of bored resignation. Evelyn moved through the crowd with practiced grace, a perfect hostess in a sapphire silk dress that Richard had picked out. To everyone here, she was Mrs. Richard Reed, an elegant extension of her husband's success. Richard was holding court near the floor-to-ceiling windows, a glass of scotch in his hand, his voice booming with confidence. He was a handsome man, his charisma a weapon he wielded with casual cruelty. Evelyn watched him from across the room as he spoke to Jonathan Vance, his oldest friend and business partner. "You see, Johnny, the market is all about instinct," Richard declared loud enough for those around him to hear. "You can't get bogged down in the minutiae. You have to feel the momentum." A younger associate, eager to impress, asked Richard, "What does your wife think of your latest ventures? Does she follow the market?" Richard let out a short, dismissive laugh. He turned and gestured toward Evelyn with his glass. "Evelyn. Oh, she handles the real portfolio, making sure our home looks like $1 million and that the caterers don't run out of champagne. Her biggest investment decision is choosing between the Chardonnay and the Sauvignon Blanc." The men around him chuckled appreciatively. Evelyn's smile didn't falter a perfect porcelain mask she had learned to wear over years of practice. But inside a familiar cold knot tightened in her stomach. It wasn't the first time he'd dismissed her so publicly, but each instance felt like a fresh cut. He knew she had graduated top of her class with a degree in economics, a fact he conveniently omitted as if her intelligence was an inconvenient truth that diluted his own brilliance. She had willingly stepped back to raise their son now off at boarding school, and to build a home, a platform from which Richard could launch his meteoric career. It was a partnership she had once believed. Now she felt like a silent investor whose contributions had been written off the books. Later, as she was directing the staff to clear away dessert plates, she passed by Richard's study. The door was slightly ajar. He and Jonathan were inside, their voices low and conspiratorial. "It's a guaranteed 10-bagger, I tell you," Jonathan was saying. "Aura-Gen, they're on the verge of a breakthrough in AI-driven medical diagnostics. The FDA approval is practically a done deal. We get in. Now we'll be printing money." "I've seen the prospectus," Richard replied, his voice thick with greed. "Looks solid. The hype is real. I'm thinking of leveraging the portfolio to go in big. Really big." Evelyn froze, her hand hovering over the door. Leveraging their entire portfolio. That was insanely risky. It was their future, their son's future. She slipped away before they could notice her, the name Aura-Gen echoing in her mind. That night, long after Richard had fallen into a Scotch-induced sleep, Evelyn crept out of bed and went to her small personal office, a space Richard referred to as her hobby room. She powered on her laptop. For years she had managed the household expenses with meticulous detail, running their domestic life like a small, efficient corporation. She created spreadsheets for everything, tracking market prices for groceries, optimizing utility usage, and managing contractor bids for home maintenance. It was this habit of methodical research that she now applied to Aura Gen. For the next 3 hours, she fell down a rabbit hole. She didn't just read the glowing prospectus. She read the footnotes. She cross-referenced the names on their board of directors, finding that 2 of them had been involved in a tech company that went bankrupt under suspicious circumstances 5 years prior. She dug into the medical journals cited in their research, discovering that the breakthrough technology was still highly theoretical, with a peer-reviewed study raising significant concerns about its scalability and accuracy. The FDA approval Jonathan called a done deal was in fact only in its earliest preliminary phase. The deeper she dug, the more red flags she found. The company was burning through cash at an alarming rate, and its revenue projections were based on best-case scenarios that bordered on fantasy. It was a house of cards built on hype and slick marketing. It was exactly the kind of investment Richard, blinded by his own instinct, would fall for. She compiled her findings into a neat 2-page summary with links and sources clearly cited. She knew she had to try to warn him. As the first light of dawn crept over the city, she felt a tremor of fear. But it was overshadowed by a cold, clear sense of purpose. She wasn't just a housewife. She was the risk manager for their family, a job Richard had abdicated long ago. And she had just identified a catastrophic threat. Evelyn waited until Saturday morning. Richard was always more relaxed on Saturdays, reading the financial papers on the plush leather sofa in their sunroom. She approached him cautiously, holding a freshly brewed coffee and the 2 pages she had printed. "Richard, darling, could I have a moment?" she asked, her voice calm and even. He glanced up from his paper, a flicker of annoyance in his eyes. "I'm a bit busy, Ev, trying to stay ahead of the curve." "I know. It's about that." "I overheard you talking about a company called Aura Gen." She began placing the coffee on the table beside him. "I was curious, so I did a little reading." He smirked, folding his newspaper. "Oh, you did? Did you? Don't tell me you've decided to take an interest in the real world." She ignored the barb, her resolve hardening. "I think you should be careful, Richard. Their technology isn't proven, and some of their board members have a questionable history. Their cash flow is a major concern. I've summarized a few points here." She held out the papers. He took them from her, his eyes scanning the first few lines. The smirk on his face slowly transformed into a deep, incredulous frown. Then he threw his head back and laughed. It was not a kind sound. It was loud, booming, and filled with mockery. "Evelyn, this is adorable," he said, wiping a tear of mirth from his eye. He waved her summary in the air like a flag of surrender. "My little housewife playing stock market analyst. What did you use Google? Did you find some angry posts on a Reddit forum?" I read their SEC filings and cross-referenced the medical journals they cited, she said, her voice turning icy. "The data is all there if you look past the marketing material. It's a gamble, Richard, a reckless one." His amusement vanished, replaced by a flash of anger. "A reckless gamble. I've built our entire life on my reckless gambles. I am the one who understands this world. Evelyn, not you. You understand table settings and parent-teacher conferences. Stick to what you know." He crumpled her carefully researched notes into a ball and tossed it into a nearby wastebasket. "I appreciate the effort," he sneered, "but leave the thinking to me." He stood up, towering over her. "I'm doubling my position in Aura-Gen on Monday. Jonathan and I are going all in, and I don't want to hear another word about it." The finality in his tone was absolute. The conversation was over. As he walked away, Evelyn stood frozen, the sound of his laughter still echoing in her ears. It was a profound moment of clarity. He hadn't just dismissed her research. He had dismissed her. Her intellect, her concern, her very identity, beyond the role she played as his wife, was a complete fiction in his mind. The partnership was a sham. She wasn't a partner. She was an employee, and an unpaid one at that. 3 weeks later, the House of Cards collapsed. The news broke on a Tuesday morning. A scathing investigative report had exposed Aura-Gen's fraudulent claims, leading to an immediate SEC investigation and the suspension of their stock trading. The breakthrough technology was a bust, the FDA approval a lie. The stock, which had been soaring on pure hype, was now worthless. Evelyn knew the exact moment Richard found out. She heard a heavy thud from his study, followed by a string of curses that turned the air blue. She found him, slumped in his chair, his face ashen, staring at his monitor, where the bright red downward plunging line told a story of financial ruin. "How much?" she asked quietly from the doorway. He looked up at her, his eyes wild with a toxic cocktail of rage and panic. "Everything," he hissed. "It's all gone. Wiped out." She expected remorse. She expected an apology, an admission that she had been right. Instead, he channeled all of his self-loathing into pure, unadulterated fury directed at her. "This is your fault," he roared, slamming his fist on the desk. "You and your negative energy, you jinxed it with your pathetic little research." The accusation was so absurd, so utterly divorced from reality, that Evelyn didn't even flinch. She just stared at him, seeing for the first time the terrified, insecure little man hiding behind the bravado. He wasn't a financial genius. He was a gambler who had finally lost a bet he couldn't cover. In the weeks that followed, a chilling silence fell over the penthouse. The lavish parties stopped. The cheerful chatter was replaced by a tense, oppressive quiet. Richard became a ghost in their home, secretive and sullen. He spent hours locked in his study, making hushed, desperate phone calls. When he did speak to Evelyn, it was with a cold, resentful detachment. He started hiding financial statements, changing online passwords, and intercepting the mail. He was building a wall around their finances, locking her out completely. He thought he was protecting his secrets, but all he was doing was giving her the one thing she needed most, the motivation to build a fortress of her own. The wall Richard built around their finances was cold and absolute. Evelyn found herself locked out of accounts she had previously managed, her inquiries met with curt, dismissive answers. He was cutting her off, isolating her from the truth of their new reality. He believed that by controlling the information, he controlled her. It was his most critical miscalculation. One rainy afternoon, while sorting through old files in a desperate attempt to create a new household budget with the meager allowance Richard now gave her, she stumbled upon a dusty, forgotten file box. It contained memorabilia from her grandmother, Eleanor Hayes, a formidable woman who had run her own small bookstore for 40 years. Inside, among pressed flowers and old photographs, was a bank statement from a trust account. It was dated from over a decade ago, from just after her grandmother's passing. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. She vaguely remembered Richard telling her that her grandmother's inheritance had been a paltry sum, and that he had taken care of it, rolling it into their main investment account for better growth. She had trusted him without question at the time. The statement showed an initial deposit of $50,000. It wasn't a fortune, but it was far from paltry. A few phone calls to the bank citing her legal right as the beneficiary confirmed her fears. Richard had never merged the funds. He had opened a separate low-interest savings account under her name and left the money there to languish its value, slowly eroding against inflation year after year. To him, it was insignificant, not worth his time to manage. To Evelyn, in that moment, it was everything. It was a life raft. The next day, she told Richard she was going to a spa for the day, one of the few luxuries he still permitted, as it maintained the illusion of their untroubled life. Instead, she took a taxi to a different part of the city, to a bank where they had no history. With a pounding heart, she walked in and liquidated the entire account. Then she went to a different brokerage firm, one she had researched for weeks, known for its discretion and powerful online platform. Using her maiden name, Evelyn Hayes, and the address of a private mail service she had set up, she opened an investment account. Transferring the $50,000 felt like an act of rebellion. It was the first financial decision she had made entirely on her own in over 15 years. Back in her hobby room, which now felt more like a command center, she began her new life. She sold the designer handbags and jewelry Richard had bought her, the trinkets of her gilded cage, on consignment, adding another $25,000 to her secret war chest. With a starting capital of $75,000, she began to invest. She did not follow Richard's path of high-risk, high-reward gambles. She did the opposite. She channeled her grandmother Eleanor, a woman who believed in substance over style, in value that was built to last. Evelyn looked for boring companies, the kind of businesses Wall Street hotshots like her husband scoffed at. She invested in a company that manufactured specialized medical-grade packaging, a family-owned firm with a long history of steady dividends. She bought shares in a regional waste management company that had just secured a 20-year municipal contract. She researched agricultural firms developing drought-resistant seeds. Her days became a complex covert operation. By morning, she was the perfect housewife, planning menus, overseeing the cleaning staff, and fielding calls from the school. But in the quiet hours of the afternoon, while Richard was at his office trying to salvage his reputation, she was Evelyn Hayes, a shrewd and meticulous investor. She filled notebooks with research, building her own algorithms in spreadsheets to track price-to-earnings ratios, debt levels, and insider trading patterns. She read everything: annual reports, industry journals, patent filings. Her first few trades were small but successful. A 5% gain here, an 8% gain there. It was slow, methodical work. She reinvested every penny of profit, while Richard was desperately chasing big wins to cover his catastrophic losses, making increasingly reckless bets. Evelyn was quietly laying bricks, building a foundation. One evening, Richard came home in an unusually foul mood. He tossed a financial journal onto the coffee table in disgust. "Look at this garbage," he grumbled. "The whole market is spooked. Everyone's running to these pathetic, safe stocks. Utilities, consumer staples. It's a coward's market. There's no money to be made in being safe." Evelyn glanced at the cover story. It was about the rise of stable, value-based investing in a volatile market. The article highlighted several companies as examples of smart defensive plays. 3 of them were in her portfolio. She simply nodded, a placid expression on her face. "That's a shame, dear," she said, taking a sip of her tea. Inside, her heart was hammering with a quiet, thrilling sense of victory. He called it a coward's market. She knew it was a smart one. and he had no idea he was living with one of its most disciplined students. Her secret fund was growing slowly but surely. It was her escape plan, her revenge, her declaration of independence, compounding silently in the dark. 6 months turned into a year, and Evelyn's double life became her new normal. Her secret portfolio, nurtured by her relentless research and patient strategy, began to show astonishing results. The initial $75,000 had crossed the $200,000 mark, then $350,000. It grew not in explosive leaps, but in a steady, inexorable climb. She had developed an uncanny ability to identify undervalued assets just before the market took notice, a skill born from hours of disciplined study, not a gambler's instinct. The strain of her secret, however, was immense. She lived in a constant state of low-grade fear, terrified of discovery. She used a dedicated laptop hidden in a false-bottomed ottoman in her office, accessed the internet through a private VPN, and communicated with her broker using a burner phone. Every ping from her phone, every unexpected knock on her office door from Richard sent a jolt of adrenaline through her veins. Meanwhile, Richard's demeanor had curdled from sullen to openly resentful. His attempts to recoup his aura-gen losses had failed spectacularly. He was chasing the market, always one step behind, growing more desperate and volatile with each failed trade. The penthouse, once a symbol of their success, now felt like a pressure cooker. The tension was suffocating. It was during this period that a new name began to surface in Richard's conversations: Isabella Rossi. According to Richard, she was a brilliant, high-powered financial consultant he had hired to help restructure his firm. He spoke of her with a reverence he had never once shown Evelyn. "Isabella has this incredible read on global markets," he would say at dinner, not speaking to Evelyn so much as to the space she occupied. "She's not afraid to be aggressive. She understands that to make real money, you have to take big risks." Evelyn first met Isabella at a dreary obligatory cocktail party for Richard's firm. Isabella was everything Evelyn was not, or rather everything Evelyn was perceived not to be. She was sharp and angular, dressed in a severe but impossibly chic black suit, her dark hair pulled back in a tight chignon. She moved with the predatory confidence of a shark, her eyes constantly scanning the room. When Richard introduced them, Isabella gave Evelyn a dismissive once-over glance, her smile thin and artificial. "So you're the little woman who holds down the fort," Isabella said, her voice dripping with condescension. "It must be so. Relaxing. To not have to worry your pretty little head about things like arbitrage and derivatives." Richard laughed, a sycophantic, ugly sound. "Evelyn keeps the home fires burning, right, darling?" Evelyn smiled, her serene porcelain smile. "It's a full-time job managing Richard's domestic assets," she replied, her tone light and airy. "You'd be surprised at the overhead." Isabella's eyes narrowed slightly, catching the faint glint of steel beneath the velvet. For a moment, the two women sized each other up, two queens on a chessboard, though only one of them knew they were playing a game. Evelyn's suspicions about Isabella went far beyond professional jealousy. She started noticing small things. Richard's phone, which was now perpetually locked and guarded, would light up with late-night texts. There were credit card charges for exorbitant dinners at restaurants Evelyn had never been to, and for hotel suites in their own city. He claimed they were client meetings arranged by Isabella. Her research skills, honed by months of market analysis, were now turned toward a new target. It was sickeningly easy. Isabella Rossi wasn't just a consultant. She was a corporate raider with a reputation for asset-stripping struggling firms. Her consulting firm, Rossi Capital, was a shell corporation registered in the Cayman Islands. A little more digging revealed a trail of broken companies and ruined partners in her wake. And her social media, though private, had a few tagged photos that she had missed. One showed her and Richard on a yacht in the Caribbean, dated from a weekend he had claimed to be at a conference in Chicago. They were not standing like colleagues. The knowledge landed like a physical blow. The betrayal was no longer a suspicion. It was a cold, hard fact. He wasn't just losing their money. He was spending what was left of it on his mistress. The condescension, the dismissiveness, the financial wall he had built. It was all part of a larger, more sinister campaign to render her powerless before he ultimately cast her aside. That evening, Evelyn was working on her hidden laptop when a newswire alert flashed across her screen. A small, obscure biotech company, Viridian Pharmaceuticals, had just announced a surprise FDA approval for a revolutionary Alzheimer's drug. She had been tracking Viridian for months, quietly buying shares. Her research had shown that their clinical trial data was exceptionally strong, yet they were almost completely ignored by mainstream analysts. Her portfolio, which was heavily weighted in Viridian stock, had just exploded. She ran the numbers, her hands trembling. Her initial $75,000 through a year of painstaking work and one brilliantly researched bet had just crossed the $1 million mark. She stared at the number on the screen, a dizzying string of zeros. It wasn't just money. It was power. It was independence. It was ammunition. The grief and humiliation of her husband's betrayal were still raw. But now they were joined by something else, a cold, diamond-hard fury. Richard and Isabella thought she was a decorative fool, a little woman to be managed and discarded. They were about to find out how wrong they were. The game had changed, and Evelyn Hayes was ready to make her move. The first million was a psychological threshold. It transformed Evelyn from a survivor, building a life raft, into a predator, building an arsenal. The knowledge of Richard's affair with Isabella Rossi, coupled with her newfound financial independence, didn't break her. It forged her anger into a weapon she knew Richard was planning to leave her. The question was no longer how she would survive it, but how she would win. To win, she needed more information. She needed to know the full extent of Richard's financial malfeasance and the true nature of his entanglement with Isabella. The opportunity came in the form of a letter from their accountant regarding their annual tax filing. Richard, in his arrogance, had tossed it on the hall table for her to handle, as he always did, with what he considered domestic paperwork. The letter requested documents from their primary mortgage and home equity line of credit. Evelyn logged into their joint bank account, one of the few to which she still had access, though its balance was pitifully low to download the statements. As she navigated the bank's portal, a linked account caught her eye. It was a second mortgage on their penthouse, one she had no knowledge of. It had been taken out 6 months ago. The amount was staggering $2 million. Her blood ran cold. He had leveraged their home, their primary asset, without her knowledge or consent. Her signature was on the original deed. A loan of this magnitude would have required her sign-off. She dug deeper, and the pieces began to fall into place. A few months ago, Richard had her sign a stack of papers he claimed were for a simple refinancing of their original mortgage to a lower interest rate. He had rushed her through it, tapping his pen impatiently while she scanned the pages, trusting foolishly she had signed where he indicated. He must have slipped the second mortgage application into that stack. It was fraud. She followed the money trail. The $2 million had been wired out of the account the day after it was funded. A significant portion had gone into Richard's personal trading account, the one he used for his reckless, failing bets. But the rest, over $1 million, had been transferred in a series of payments to a single entity, Rossi Capital. Evelyn felt a wave of nausea. He hadn't just used their home to fund his gambling addiction. He had funneled their family's wealth directly to his mistress's shell company. Isabella wasn't just his partner in infidelity. She was his partner in crime, bleeding their estate dry before he made his exit. The full, horrifying picture of his plan was now crystal clear. He and Isabella were systematically draining his and Evelyn's joint assets. Once there was nothing left but debt, he would file for divorce, leaving her with a mountain of liabilities and a house she couldn't afford, which would then be foreclosed upon. He would walk away financially entangled with Isabella and start a new life, leaving Evelyn destitute. His years of calling her just a housewife were not merely condescension. It was a deliberate strategy to ensure she was too ignorant and powerless to see it coming or fight back. He wasn't just leaving her, he was planning to erase her. She sat in her small office, the glow of the monitor illuminating her pale, shocked face. The silence of the penthouse pressed in on her. For a long moment she felt nothing but a vast, hollow emptiness. The man she had built a life with, the father of her child, had plotted her utter destruction with the cold calculation of a sociopath. The emptiness slowly gave way to something else, a rage so pure and so cold it felt like ice flowing through her veins. The grief was still there, a hot core of pain in her chest, but the ice of her anger encased it, contained it. She would not cry. She would not scream. Tears were a luxury she could not afford. She stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the city lights that glittered like a sea of scattered diamonds. He saw her as a liability to be discarded. Isabella saw her as a fool to be fleeced. They thought she was a pawn in their game. But a pawn that makes it to the other side of the board can become a queen. Her mind, sharpened by a year of intense market analysis, began to work with terrifying clarity. She was no longer playing defense, trying to survive. She was going on the attack. She needed to know their next move. Richard, in his arrogance, still talked about his market plays, unable to resist boasting even in his decline. He had recently become obsessed with a company called Phoenix Renewables. It's a dog, he had scoffed to Jonathan Vance over the phone just last night, a call Evelyn had listened to on a listening device she had discreetly planted in his study. Their solar panel tech is a decade old. They're burning through Source. Isabella's sources say they're about to post a catastrophic earnings report. We're going to short the hell out of it. It's the easiest money we'll make all year. Shorting the stock. A bet that its value would plummet. A high-risk, high-reward move, typical of the new desperate Richard. Evelyn turned back to her hidden laptop. Her million-dollar portfolio gave her access to premium analyst tools and research platforms. She typed in the ticker symbol for Phoenix Renewables. She would not mourn the death of her marriage. She would orchestrate the obliteration of the man who had betrayed her. Her new research project had begun. The shock of Richard's betrayal did not break Evelyn. It calcified her. The grief was a hot, molten core deep within her, but it was now encased in a thick, impenetrable layer of ice. In her small office, the hobby room that had become her war room, she no longer felt the tremors of a wife wronged. She felt the cold, singular focus of a predator that had just caught the scent of its prey. Her new target was Phoenix Renewables. The name itself felt like a cosmic joke, a premonition she was determined to fulfill. Richard's boastful, dismissive analysis, overheard through the listening device, echoed in her mind. It's a dog. They're about to post a catastrophic earnings report. We're going to short the hell out of it. He and Isabella saw a carcass to be picked clean. Evelyn, however, had learned that the most valuable truths were never on the surface. Her entire strategy was built on digging deeper than anyone else was willing to go. Her investigation began not with passion, but with a chillingly methodical discipline. For 3 days and 3 nights, the world outside her office ceased to exist. The city lights blurred into a meaningless backdrop. The passage of time was marked only by the brewing of fresh coffee and the ache in her shoulders. She became a machine for processing information, fueled by a fury so profound it had become a quiet, efficient energy source. On the surface, Richard's thesis was sound. Phoenix's balance sheet was a horror show of red ink. Their quarterly reports showed mounting losses, shrinking margins, and alarming cash burn. Their flagship product, a line of traditional solar panels, was being crushed by cheaper, more efficient competitors. Wall Street analysts had written the company off their reports, littered with phrases like legacy technology and insolvent trajectory. It was a textbook case for a short seller. But Evelyn wasn't reading the book. She was dissecting it. She ignored the analysts' conclusions and went straight to the raw data. She downloaded years of SEC filings, shareholder reports, and technical addenda, laying them out on her screen, not as a story, but as a mosaic. She tracked their R&D expenditure, noticing a massive, seemingly inexplicable spike over the past 36 months. Where was all that money going? It wasn't reflected in any new products on the market. She built a spreadsheet cross-referencing the names of every engineer and scientist Phoenix had hired. This led her down a rabbit hole of academic papers and university faculty lists. That's when she found them, Dr. Aris Thorne and Dr. Lena Petrova, 2 of the world's leading material scientists poached from a prestigious European research institute 3 years prior. They had vanished from the academic world, their work going dark only to reappear on the Phoenix Renewables payroll under vague, unassuming titles. Why would a company on the brink of bankruptcy hire such expensive, high-powered talent? The answer, she suspected, lay buried in the most obscure place she could think of, the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office database. The search was a grueling exercise in patience, a hunt for a needle in a digital haystack. She sifted through thousands of filings related to photovoltaic technology, her eyes burning from the screen's glare. Then, late on the 3rd night, she found it. It was a patent granted just 6 weeks ago, filed under a subsidiary shell company to avoid attention. The language was dense, intentionally arcane, but the diagrams and chemical formulas told a story of breathtaking innovation. It wasn't for a better solar panel. It was for a transparent, paper-thin solar film that could be seamlessly integrated into any glass surface. A transparent film with a photovoltaic efficiency rating that was, according to the patent's own data, double the current industry standard. Evelyn leaned back in her chair, her heart hammering against her ribs. This wasn't just an improvement. It was a revolution. It was the holy grail of renewable energy. Every window in every skyscraper, every home, every core could become a silent, invisible power generator. Phoenix Renewables wasn't a dying company. It was a dormant volcano, and the catastrophic earnings report Richard was so gleefully anticipating was the final rumbling tremor before the eruption. Her mind, now operating with the speed and precision of a supercomputer, connected the final dots. The disastrous earnings were real. The company had poured every last cent into this secret project, codenamed Helios. The unusual investor call, scheduled for the morning after the earnings release, was the kill shot. They would let the bad news crater the stock, luring in a flood of aggressive short sellers, like Richard and Isabella, who would borrow millions of shares to bet on its further decline. Then, with the trap perfectly set, they would unveil Helios. It would trigger a short squeeze of biblical proportions. Every short seller would be caught in a violent financial hurricane, forced to buy back shares at any price to cover their massive, rapidly multiplying losses. Their frantic buying would act as rocket fuel, launching the stock into the stratosphere. Richard and Isabella weren't just walking into a trap. They were walking into a financial meat grinder, and they were the ones who had turned it on. A cold, exhilarating thrill, equal parts terror and righteous vindication, washed over Evelyn. This was it. The perfect weapon. A form of justice so elegant, so complete, it was a work of art. She would use the very system he worshipped, the high-stakes game he believed she could never comprehend, to orchestrate his utter ruin. But to wield this weapon, she would have to risk everything. Her $1 million portfolio, her safe money, was her escape hatch. It was her future, her independence, the fortress she had painstakingly built, brick by boring brick. Now she had to be willing to burn it all down for a chance at a different kind of freedom, the freedom that comes from absolute victory. Her finger hovered over the liquidate all positions button on her brokerage account. For a heart-stopping moment, the face of her son flashed in her mind. If she was wrong, she wouldn't just be broke. She would be in debt for millions, a fate even worse than the one Richard had planned for her. Then she thought of Richard's mocking laughter, of Isabella's smug, condescending smile, of the cold dread she felt when she saw her own forged signature on a $2 million loan. The doubt did not just vanish. It was incinerated by the white-hot core of her rage. She clicked the button. One by one, her safe, sensible holdings were sold off. The packaging company, the waste management firm, the agricultural tech. The bricks of her fortress were being dismantled. Then, with a single massive order, she poured everything she had, her entire net worth, and every dollar of leverage her broker would grant her, into a high-risk, all-or-nothing bet call options on Phoenix Renewables stock, set to expire the week after the earnings call. It was a gambler's move, a throw of the dice so audacious that even Richard in his prime would have called it insane. She clicked Confirm Trade. The trade was executed. A quiet ping from her computer confirmed the transaction. There was no going back. The silence in the room was deafening. The next day was a masterclass in deception. She went about her routine, discussing menus with the housekeeper and arranging flowers, a serene mask of domesticity, hiding the raging storm within. When the market closed on Thursday, the Phoenix Renewables earnings report was released. It was, as everyone expected, a bloodbath. The stock collapsed in after-hours trading, hemorrhaging over 60% of its value. From his study, she heard Richard's roar of triumphant laughter through her hidden listening device. He was on the phone with Jonathan Vance. "It's a bloodbath. We're going to be rich, Johnny. I told you Rossi was a genius. That little housewife of mine would probably tell me to invest in toilet paper. This is how real players do it." A grim smile touched Evelyn's lips. "Enjoy this moment, Richard." She thought, her heart a cold, heavy stone in her chest. "It's the last one you'll ever have." Sleep was an impossibility. She spent the night watching the pre-market numbers on her phone, her body humming with a mixture of terror and adrenaline. At 8:30 a.m. the next morning, Phoenix Renewables began their investor call, and at 8:35 a.m. they announced Project Helios and unveiled the technology that would change the world. The reaction was not a wave, it was a detonation. The stock, which had closed near $5 per share, became a blur of motion. It gapped up to $50, then $75 in pre-market trading. When the opening bell rang at 9:30 a.m., a tsunami of buy orders hit the market. The short squeeze began. The stock didn't climb. It teleported, blowing past 100, then 150, then 200 a share. It was a vertical line of brilliant, violent green on her screen. Evelyn watched the numbers of her own account balance climb into the stratosphere digits, multiplying faster than she could read them. 1 million, 10 million, 50, 100 million. The numbers ceased to feel real, transforming into an abstract symbol of her power. Then, at the height of the frenzy, came the call she was waiting for. It was from her private banker, his voice a hushed whisper of awe and disbelief. "Ma'am," he said, "there's a massive margin call out on Reed Financial. They've been completely wiped out. The brokerage is bundling their defaulted debt for immediate sale to the highest bidder. We have the opportunity to acquire it." The final piece of the mechanism clicked into place. The trap was sprung. The Queen had not only crossed the board, she was about to take possession of it. "Buy it all," Evelyn said, her voice perfectly steady, devoid of any emotion. "Use the Phoenix profits, and do it quietly. I want to own every last dollar." The annual Benefactors Gala for the Metropolitan Art Museum was the glittering apex of the city's social calendar, a theater where power was performed and fortunes were consecrated under the soft glow of crystal chandeliers. For 15 years, Evelyn had prepared for this night, as an acolyte preparing a high priest for a ceremony. She had selected Richard's cufflinks, ensured his tuxedo was perfectly pressed, and chosen a gown that would complement his suit without ever outshining it. She was a reflection, a beautiful echo in a room full of booming voices. Tonight, she prepared for battle. She stood before the full-length mirror in her dressing room, a space that had long felt like a luxurious holding cell. She bypassed the rows of gowns Richard had bought her, the flamboyant sequins, the demure pastels, the safe and silent silks. Instead, she chose a dress she had purchased herself just 2 days prior. It was a column of deep crimson, the color of blood and wine and victory. The fabric was a heavy matte silk that absorbed the light rather than reflecting it. A dress that announced its presence with quiet gravity, not a desperate shimmer. She wore no necklace, no bracelets. Her only adornment was a pair of simple, brilliant-cut diamond earrings, the ones her grandmother Eleanor had left her. They were a reminder of a different kind of wealth, a legacy of substance over style. As she clasped them on, she wasn't just accessorizing. She was donning her inheritance, her armor. Looking at her reflection, she saw not Mrs. Richard Reed, the society hostess, but Evelyn Hayes, the architect of a reckoning. Walking into the grand ballroom alone was in itself an act of defiance. The air was thick with the scent of hothouse flowers and expensive perfume, a symphony of clinking glasses and calculated laughter. She immediately felt the subtle shift in the room's atmosphere, the ripple of curiosity that followed her solitary entrance. Whispers followed in her wake, like the train of an invisible gown. Heads turned, eyes filled with a mixture of pity and predatory interest tracked her progress. She knew what they were saying. "There's Evelyn Reed. Poor thing. Have you heard the rumors about Richard and that consultant? Where is he?" She accepted a glass of champagne from a passing waiter, her hand perfectly steady, and found a strategic position near the grand marble staircase, a place from which she could observe and be observed. An hour later they arrived. Richard made his entrance not just as a man attending a party, but as a king returning to his court. And on his arm was Isabella Rossi, a vision in stark, unforgiving black, a slash of darkness against the room's gilded splendor. They were a unit, a matched set of ambition and arrogance. They moved through the crowd with a smug, proprietary air, soaking in the attention blind to the financial guillotine that was hanging over their heads by a single thread. It didn't take them long to spot Evelyn. Seeing her alone, vulnerable, or so they thought was the opportunity Richard had been waiting for. With Isabella's hand possessively on his arm, they cut a path directly toward her. A small, silent circle formed around them as people sensed the impending drama drawn to the scent of a public execution. Evelyn Darling Richard began his voice a performance of pained sincerity, pitched just loud enough to be heard by their audience. "I'm so glad you're here. Isabella and I were just... Well, there's simply no easy way to say this." He paused for dramatic effect, placing a hand on Evelyn's arm, as if to steady her for the coming blow. "We're together now. Our marriage, I'm afraid, is over." A collective theatrical gasp rippled through the onlookers. This was the gossip they had come for, served up on a silver platter. Richard swelled with self-importance, relishing his role as the reluctant yet decisive man of action. "I want you to know," he continued, his tone dripping with patronizing pity, "that I will of course make sure you're taken care of. A generous settlement. You've been a wonderful wife in your way, and you won't have to worry your pretty little head about a thing." This was his final, most public dismissal. Just a housewife. The words hung in the air, a final branding of her worthlessness, a public declaration that she was a helpless creature entirely dependent upon his magnanimity. Evelyn didn't flinch. She didn't cry. For a long moment, she simply stood there, letting his cruel pronouncement settle into the silence. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, she reached up and removed his hand from her arm, her touch cool and definitive. She looked not at him, but at Isabella, and then at the avid faces of the crowd surrounding them. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was not the shattered whisper of a victim. It was perfectly calm, chillingly clear, and it carried the cold, immutable weight of absolute authority. "That won't be necessary, Richard." As if on cue, the evening's host stepped up to the microphone on the ballroom stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention, please," he boomed. "We have a very special announcement. A last-minute donation has been made tonight that has shattered all previous records for this gala. Please join me in offering a thunderous round of applause for our new premier patron, the founder of the newly established Hayes Capital, Ms. Evelyn Hayes." A powerful spotlight, as if an instrument of fate, swiveled from the stage and landed squarely on Evelyn. The name echoed through the cavernous room, Evelyn Hayes. A murmur of profound confusion swept through the gala. Richard and Isabella stared at her, their triumphant smiles, frozen, contorting into masks of disbelief. Hayes, not Reed. In the blinding white light, Evelyn's crimson dress seemed to burn. She met Richard's utterly baffled gaze. "Your timing, as usual, is terrible," she said, her voice now slicing through the stunned silence. "You seem to have missed a few phone calls today, while you were busy celebrating your supposed win on Phoenix Renewables. Perhaps the one from your broker explaining the concept of a historic short squeeze, or the follow-up regarding your firm's complete and total liquidation due to a catastrophic margin call this morning." The color drained from Richard's face. Beside him, Isabella's jaw went slack. the artifice of her composure shattering in an instant. The bloodbath he had celebrated was his own. He was just the last to know. The mountain of debt your firm defaulted on was bundled and sold this afternoon to a private buyer. Evelyn continued, taking a step closer, her voice dropping to an intimate, lethal whisper that everyone could still hear. I bought it, Richard. All of it. So you see, I'm not just the woman you're leaving. As of 3 o'clock this afternoon, I am your primary creditor. I own your debt. I own what's left of your firm. And by extension, my dear, she held his terrified gaze. I own you. She let the words land, each one a perfectly placed dagger. The crowd was utterly silent, captivated by the raw, brutal shift in power. And as for our home, she added, her gaze shifting to Isabella with icy contempt, the $2 million mortgage you both so cleverly and fraudulently secured against it. That was a foolish, foolish mistake. It gives me all the evidence I need to not only ensure you get nothing in the divorce, Richard, but to also pursue federal fraud charges. As for you, Ms. Rosie Isabella visibly flinched. My legal team will be in touch regarding your firm's role in conspiring to defraud a marital asset. I do hope you enjoy the Cayman Islands, because after this you will never work in this city or this country again. Richard stood there, utterly broken, a hollowed-out man in an expensive suit. The titan of finance exposed as a fool and a criminal publicly annihilated by the one person he had never even considered a player in the game. Evelyn turned back to him, her expression not of anger, but of finality. Our marriage is over, Richard. You were right about that. You will be out of the house by tomorrow morning. You may take your clothes and your personal effects. Everything else, the art, the furniture, the cars, now belongs to the bank, to cover a fraction of your debt. She paused, raising her champagne flute in a mock toast. A ghost of a smile, the first she had shown all night, finally touched her lips. And as you know, she said, her voice ringing with the clarity of a bell, the bank is me. Without another word, she turned and walked away, the spotlight following her as she ascended the grand staircase. She didn't look back at the wreckage she had made. She left Richard and Isabella frozen in the middle of the ballroom, surrounded by a sea of shocked faces and the eruption of frantic, disbelieving whispers. She was walking away, not from a marriage, but from a cage. And she was walking, not into the darkness, but toward the dawn of her own empire. Evelyn Reed's story didn't end with revenge. That was just the beginning. She didn't just take back her life. She built an empire on the ashes of the one that had been stolen from her. Hayes Capital became a powerhouse on Wall Street, not through reckless gambling, but through the same meticulous research and quiet diligence she had once applied to her household budget. She became a legend not for her wealth, but for her integrity and her mission to empower other women to take control of their financial destinies. She proved that the qualities society so often dismisses in women, patience, attention to detail, and a cautious, steady approach, are not weaknesses, but formidable strengths. Her story serves as a powerful reminder that the most brilliant minds can be found in the most unexpected places, and that underestimating someone based on their role can be a devastatingly costly mistake. She was once called just a housewife, but in the end, she became the master of her own universe. What did you think of Evelyn's incredible journey? Was her revenge justified? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of justice and empowerment, please hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you subscribe to our channel for more unforgettable stories. Thank you for listening.